To what extent do the places that you occupy physically shape your personality? I know that might be quite a strange question to be able to even grasp or grapple with, let alone start a video with, but that's the whole purpose of the book that I'm going to be recommending today. It's understanding that when I think about myself, I can't just come up with an idea of my identity in a vacuum. I can't just sit here and think, this is exactly who I am, independent of any other person or culture or situation that I happen to be in. I'm embedded in a context. I'm relevant according to other people and according to the world that I'm living in. So that needs to be called into question because who I am has already been shaped by the constraints of the world around me. I've been subtly pushed to become one type of person compared to another because it's been easier for me to do that. It's been more beneficial for me to do that if I think back to my earlier life, as it has been for everybody else around me. So what we're trying to introduce here is this questioning, is this awareness of what is actually around you. That's why today's book recommendation is this very, very short book. It's only 100 pages. Non-Places, an introduction to Supermodernity. I'm not going to focus too much on the idea of supermodernity for the sake of this video, but I do want to call into question the purpose of this book and how this can have such a wide-reaching impact on so many people. Because if I think about who I am, I've got to think about myself in terms of the people that are around me. That makes sense. If I think I want to be a certain type of person, let's say I want to consider myself to be a courageous person, I've got to do things that are considered to be courageous by other people for them to give me that label. I've got to be able to also live in a society which agrees that these types of actions are examples of courage and these types of actions are not examples of courage. So I can be filtered towards a certain way. But when we start to think about this in a bigger sense, when we start to think about my identity in terms of the systems that I'm living in and the places that I occupy, suddenly the questions then start to change. If I think about just on a day-to-day basis, the places that I occupy, it's going to be at home. That's going to be the most obvious place. When I was teaching in a school, it was going to be the school itself. There was also whether I was walking there, getting a bus there, getting a train there, or a tram there, the transport to be able to get there. And we've already started there to introduce a very, very different idea. So even just going onto those particular areas, at home, I've got a relational context to the people in that home. I live with my partner. I know her. I see her as a person. She sees me as a person. I go to work. I see the children as people. They see me as a person. And as a result, we've got a human-to-human contact. But in the meantime, let's say I'm getting the bus to work. I'm sharing the same space as a lot of other people, but their identity is completely and utterly irrelevant, as is mine to them. We're all just commuters. We all just sit with our head down. We very rarely talk to each other. We're all occupying the same space physically, but mentally and emotionally, we're worlds apart. We're just reducing down that process to just transport. It's like a necessary evil. I've got to do this to be able to get from one place to another. Now, let's say I get off one stop early because I'm going to go to a shop. Well, as a result, I'm not going to a market, I'm going to a supermarket. If I went to a market, where if we go back historically 100 years or so, I'm going to be able to speak to that person. I'm going to live in a much smaller world. I'll probably already know the greengrocer. I'll know a little bit about their history and their family. I can chat to them. I can learn about them on a one-to-one basis and a human-to-human basis. But when I go to the supermarket, I don't speak to anybody. I walk in and I know roughly where all the food is going to be. I don't ask anybody how much that food is. There's just some text that tells me where it is. At the same time, I can see monitors all around me. I can hear messages being said to me over the speakers in terms of when the shop's going to open or close, or if someone else is going to be needed to be behind the desk. In that case there, I'm hearing voices and it's communication, but not communication for me. Who I am is irrelevant. Who anybody else is irrelevant. And then I go to pay, and I'm not speaking to a person there either. I'm going to a self-service checkout. The entire process has been automated. And that is going to have a big impact if I've gone from a bus where my identity is irrelevant. I've started to shop in a place where my identity is irrelevant. If, let's say, I went home and I didn't have a partner, I'd be going home to a very quiet house. If, let's say, I taught at a school where people didn't particularly like me, then I'm going to get very negative feedback. There's going to be a big focus there on confusion and anxiety and a confusion around who I am as a person, because I'm not getting feedback from somebody else. Who I am is partly related to how other people see me. There's a tension between the two. There's a dynamic interplay between the two. I could be right, I could be wrong, I could interpret things correctly or incorrectly, but at the very least there's a communication. At the very least there's a process of, I think this is the answer, and I'm going to try to figure out if this is the right answer. Whereas that's not the case, and that is in a lot of places now, which is why they're referred to as non-places. They've got no history, they've got no relationship to anybody. Who you are as a person occupying those spaces is irrelevant. If you think about supermarkets, if you think about transport, if you think about airports, they're all transitory. You're there just for the sake of having to be there to get from one place to another. But what happens when you get from that one place to the other and you still are unsure about who you are? The entire process starts to crumble. It could even be like you go out for a walk. I live near the Peak District in the UK. I could go out for a walk in the Peak District, and if I wanted to learn more about the environment, I could get out my phone and just learn from text on there. I might even come across a little plaque which has got a map on the area and it just tells me information. Even worse, it might tell me the information if I have to access it via a QR code. I really hate QR codes. It's beyond the scope of this video, but I really hate them. But the idea is I'm being further removed, I'm being further abstracted from the environment where I should be living. I'm not going to be able to ask anybody else about where it is that I am, especially on a hike, because they also, in all likelihood, won't know. They will also be referring to their phone or the same piece of disembodied information to be able to access it. And it might sound like I'm going insane to some people. It might seem like I'm going on a bit of a rant with all this. But that's the purpose of a book like this. It's to call into question what's going on all around you. Like, what are the spaces that you are occupying? How is that informing your personality? If you're feeling anxious, how is it that the world around you is making you feel that way in subtle ways that you didn't quite realize? If you've got questions around your identity, where is it that you're getting this sense of identity from? Because it can't just be you sitting down figuring it out alone at home. It can't just be you chatting to other people. It's going to come in a wider sense as well. You're born into a culture which is born into a wider context, not just globally, but in terms of the time period that you were born into as well. So much of our lives and so much of who we are is extremely context dependent. And if that context is changing all the time or is increasingly becoming occupied with places where who you are as a person occupying them is irrelevant, because who you are as a person shouldn't really impact, let's say, going to the supermarket and buying some food, that would have been very, very relevant 100 years ago when you went to the market. That would be how you kept up to date with your neighbours and your community. What happens if we start to remove ourselves from the community? What happens if we stop speaking to people overall? Not just what does that mean for them, but what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for me living in living in a context of individuals where we're all feeling the same way, but not having a chance to be able to communicate that? It's no wonder that we're living in a world which is more anxious, anxiety provoking than ever, and more confusing than ever, and people looking for direction. That's what hopefully this video series is going to be all about when I start uploading all of them to YouTube, the full 15-part series. Is starting to understand who you are and your desired future in multiple different ways, and also to give you ways to question what it is. To also go from not just who you are now to who you want to become, but to also have a deeper level of the question itself of who am I to begin with, before I even consider who I'm trying to become. Who am I in a subtle way? How has that been shaped in a subtle way? And what am I ready to let go of? And what am I ready to embrace as I move forward on my journey? A book like this covers so much, and that's why this is literally just an introduction, because it is only 100 pages or so, but it calls into question a lot of this anthropology. It calls into question the idea of places versus non-places, and the historical relevance of that, and also your identity and your agency in a place like that as well. I don't want to go in too deep in a video like this around the specifics of a book like this, because even just that type of question might seem quite alien to a lot of people. But if that is something that makes you think, or it makes you think, who else is it that I could become in the future if I changed my environment differently, then you might really enjoy a book like this, because this is the type of question that I hadn't considered up until it was introduced to me in a book like this. So this is quite an unusual one for the recommendation, given this is a series on coaching and healing. But start to consider the environment that surrounds you, and also how you occupy that space, and also how it relates to your identity and how you start to see yourself, because these are all extremely related to each other. And it just takes asking the right question and with the right guidance to be able to realize the depth and the profoundness of a question like that. Which is why I'm going to be recommending this book to you. Maybe quite an unusual one for this series, but it is Non-Places, an introduction to Supermodernity.